very warm good morning to everyone. Today's session is going to be about personal finance. Personal finance actually is more personal and less of finance. For all the people who think that to be good in investments, you need to understand accounting, you have to understand economics, you have to understand politics, you have to understand all the jargons which have been discussed in finance. Honestly, none of this is required. Simple, basic common sense is required to be a successful investor, okay, and to achieve all your financial goal. The interesting point, I'll repeat again, personal finance is more personal and less of finance. Let us start with a very interesting topic called as Lighthouse, where I will in the next 1 hour try to answer all the questions which you have on equity, on fixed income, on personal finance and everything related to money. And then in the last half an hour, 40 minutes, I'll try to answer all the questions which you have in the chat box. I would request all of you, whatever query you have in between while I'm doing the session, please keep the chat box active and live. Put your questions over there. I'll try to answer as many questions as possible when the session gets over. So let's start with the session. And thanks for taking time on a Saturday to talk and discuss about money. Equity markets, interestingly, are like cricket. I was just seeing the score of India. India are down 6 wickets in just matter of 2 hours. And that's how unpredictable cricket is. And this is how unpredictable even stock markets are. And we'll discuss more about it as we take the session forward. Now, let's try to understand something about human beings and human brains. Okay. There's a company called as Dalber. Dalber is basically a US based company. And Dalber has come out with some research which it does every year. And this is what Dalber says every year. It says equity will give returns, fixed income will give returns, commodities will give returns, real estate will give returns, inflation will be there, but unfortunately, I'll use the word unfortunately, the average investor always comes last. And Dalber has been doing this study not from 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. It has been doing this study for almost 15 to 20 years. And every year, the answer is the same. The average investor, unfortunately, comes last all the time. And Dalber actually is a US-based company. And you don't have to teach about the beauty of wealth creation to people, especially in US, because this country has seen economical growth which no other country in the entire world has seen in the last 100 years. In fact, the best minds, Warren Buffett, all the CFAs, the PhDs, the smartest people, all the books written on finance are based on US. Still, unfortunately, the average investor always comes last. And the answer for this is not because the people out over there don't have information or they have less knowledge or they don't have access to all that information. The problem is something very interesting. The problem is a human brain. The biggest culprit why people are not able to make returns or achieve their financial goals is not because they lack intelligence. The only problem is the biggest mistake is something called as behavior. In fact, our own behavior is the biggest culprit which comes between the returns which ideally one can make and the returns what people end up making. Behavior is the biggest thing what people make mistakes about. And to understand behavior, we'll have to go and understand what happens in a human brain when he takes any decision, not just decision related to money, but any decision. So let's try to understand and decode the hardware and the software which is over here. A hardware and a software which we call as brain is not developed because of 5 years or 10 years or 100 years of evolution. It has been built by millions of years of evolution. And let me explain to you how the evolution and our behavior is completely part of our DNA and you can't change that. So let's try to understand this. If you ask a bird how to fly, you don't have to teach a bird how to fly. It knows how to fly. If you see a fish, you don't have to teach a fish how to swim. It's part of its DNA. Similarly, how we think, how we behave is exactly part of our DNA. And since it's part of our DNA, we have been programmed to think in a certain way. Unfortunately, the way we think and the way we behave are not designed for investing. And that's why the decisions what we have to take is to actually fight our brain on a daily basis to be a good investor. It is said money is an emotional subject, okay? And we try to understand it too rationally. Money is an emotional subject. We have to understand all the emotions which go when we are dealing with money. In fact, the biggest stress in a person's life is actually financial stress. And people who can manage this financial stress, personal finance in the right way, will reduce a lot of stress in their entire life. So let's try to understand what are equity markets, what are fixed income, how do you do asset allocation, how do you define your goals, how do you become a successful investor? And let's start and let's try to become good, better investors so that we're able to achieve our goals in a more logical fashion. So let's start by understanding the game of investments. The interesting point of game of investments is something like this. The rules of the game are the same. Irrespective whether you are staying in United States, Europe, India, North India, South India, East India, West India, anyone across the world, the rules of the game of investments and personal finance are the same. Whether you are Ambani, who is the richest person in India, or maybe you are very middle class person or very poor, still the rules of the game of personal finance are still the same. Okay, it's all the rules of the personal finance are same. So ideally, what we are discussing right now are universal laws. It's like gravity. Okay, you can't challenge them. The rules are same, which makes it nice and interesting. Now, let's try to understand what is one big mistake which generally people do, okay, when it comes to investing, saving, and planning. I know this slide is very simple, very commonsensical, but I just thought why it's so important. There's a very iconic movie called as Diwar in Hindi cinema, launched in 1975. If you look at the cost of a movie ticket, it was 3 rupees. And today, if somebody has to go to a multiplex, the cost would be ideally 300 rupees. This in simple terms is called as inflation. 3 rupees becoming 300 rupees in just matter of 45 years is called as inflation. I remember back when I did my engineering, I completed my engineering in 2002. My annual fees was 5,000 rupees. Today, my son, who is approximately, he's in class 3, his approximate fees is around 1 lakh rupee. My engineering cost was 5,000 rupees. His class 3 fees is 1 lakh rupee. This in simple terms is called as inflation. Inflation, whether we like it or we dislike it, is an invisible enemy which we have to fight on a constant basis. So there are two enemies. One is external, which is inflation. You can't do much about it. And then there is a second enemy, which is behavior, which obviously we'll have to work upon it. Why we have to save and invest is to defeat this external enemy called as inflation. Now I'll come to something very simple, okay, but actually very, very complicated. I have met so many investors, and the biggest thing which I've realized over my entire career is that people know how to earn money, but they actually don't know for what purpose they are earning money. Okay, and they have very weird thoughts in terms of why they're earning money. The first thing about personal finance is about defining your goals. And when I say defining your goals, you have to be very precise. You don't have to make it like too complicated. Take a simple piece of paper, take a notebook, take a simple one-page piece of paper and define your goals. And what do I mean by defining your goals? Write down your goals, your short-term goals, your medium-term goals, and your long-term goals. One more mistake which I have done, people, first of all, they don't define your goals. Even when they start writing, they're not able to differentiate between visual thinking and real goal. And what do I mean by that? Let's imagine that I might say my visual thinking is that I want to travel across the world. Fine, it's a good goal, but travel across the world, that's not a definitive goal. I have to define, okay, I have to travel XYZ country, and this is the cost which I'll have to incur. And I have to travel after 5 years, and this is for that I have to plan. So the plan has to be very, very distinctive with data, because otherwise it becomes visual thinking. I've seen people having a lot of visual thinkings. That's not called as defining your goals. That's very important. Once you have written your goals, then you have to prioritize that. And one thing which I have seen generally people doing, the most important goal, and I would repeat, the most important goal, unfortunately, becomes the last and the least important goal, and that is called as retirement. Interestingly, behavior finance says a human being cannot think beyond 10 years. Okay, it's humanly not possible to think beyond 10 years. In fact, in interview, if you ask somebody what is your view or what do you want to do 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the line, people go blank. 10 years is practically impossible. And that's why people unfortunately don't think about retirement at a very early age. If you talk to anyone who's around 20, 30, 40 years old and you talk about retirement to him, are you saving for retirement? They think, no, retirement is not my top priority. And that's why generally people think about retirement at the age of 50, 50, because from 50 you can see retirement and that's when they start preparing for it. Unfortunately, the trend is changing. People are copying the West in terms of expenditure and lifestyle. But the problem is, you might easily copy, there's no problem with that. But the problem is, in Western countries, the government will still take care of you. Okay, you'll have pensions, you'll have healthcare benefits, you'll have unemployment benefits, and a lot of other benefits. In India, neither there's pension, neither there's unemployment benefits, neither there's medical benefits, nor any benefit. And that's why retirement should be the top priority for Indians when they are saving their money. One more reason why retirement should be the top priority, let me give you a very interesting data point, and this might actually open your eyes. In 1980, the average mortality age, and what do you mean by mortality? The average age at which human beings survive, okay, in India in 1980, and this might surprise most of us, was actually 48 years. In 1980, the average mortality age of India, as per WHO, was 48 years. As we speak right now, the mortality age of Indians, the entire population of India, is approximately 68 years for men, 69 years for women. And this is the entire country. And data says that if somebody crosses the age of 60, on an average, right now, he will stay on an average for 17 years. That means if you cross 60, for next 17 years, on an average, you will stay. Average means doesn't mean that everybody will stay for 70. Some people will live less. Some people will live long. We might think, okay, 67, 68 is a good age. But if you look at Western countries, especially Europe, US, Canada, Australia, Japan, the mortality age is 80, 85 years average. In Japan, it's 90 years. As we are progressing, as we are becoming developed, one thing which this generation will see, which our previous generation didn't saw, is called as retirement. We'll have very long lives. We'll have at least 20 to 30 years of long retirement. And unfortunately, Indians are not planning and saving for the most important goal for 20, 25 or 30 years of long retirement. This is one mistake which majority of the Indians are making when it comes to personal finance. So in personal finance, your first and your biggest goal ideally should be retirement. And then obviously then you have separate goals like child's education, marriage, your vacation, travel, buying a car, and maintaining your standard of living. Once you have defined your goals, okay, and you have made it, so it doesn't have to be complicated. Sit with your family, sit with your wife, or maybe sit with your husband and just discuss about it and just talk to yourself. It's a very internal thing. Talk to your advisor. And an advisor or a distributor is the best person to actually help you, because we personally don't know what our goals are. You need to have a good in-depth conversation. You have to talk to your heart out in terms of defining for what purpose I'm earning this money. And once you have done that, things can become slightly simpler. Now, once you have defined your goals, now the second idea is, let's try to understand the various asset classes. I'll briefly talk about equity. I'll talk about fixed income. I'll talk about the asset class which Indians are obsessed about, which is called as gold also. And if time permits, I'll talk about real estate. And if in case some people want to understand a little bit about commodities or even Bitcoins these days, I'll also talk about that. But predominantly it's equity, fixed income, and a little bit of gold. First is the biggest mistake. In fact, this is the learning which I had when I was reading a book by Peter Lynch, one of the best fund managers across the world. And he says something very simple. He says that Many times in the equity journey, we forget what equity is. We forget that when we are buying equity, we are actually buying businesses. And what do I mean by equity in very simple terms? We all know there are two ways of becoming rich. Either you start your own business or you invest into businesses which are already there. And what do I mean by businesses already there? It's a very simple law or simple common sense. Somebody's expenditure is somebody else's profit. Whatever I spend, you spend, and all of us are spending is nothing but the profit for somebody else. All these companies, honestly, I don't have to go anywhere far. All these companies are in front of me. When I look at the wall, I can see Asian Paints, Nerolac, or Berger Paints. When I look at my slippers, I can see Relaxo or Bata. When I look at the fan, I can see Havells or Anchor. When I go for shopping, I can see all the FMCG companies over there. Right from getting up in the morning when I brush my teeth, I can see Colgate or a Pepsodent. I have Atta, I can see ITC Ashirwad Atta. When I have Maggie, I can see Nestle. When I drive a car, I can see Mahindra, I can see Maruti, I can see Tata Motors. When I go for shopping, I can see D-Mart or Shoppers Stop. Today, I'm doing a session on technology. I can see Airtel or Reliance Jio, or maybe I can see Vodafone Idea. When I go to a bank, I can see HDFC, ICICI, Kotak, SBI, and various companies. When I buy insurance, I can see SBI or ICICI Lombard or HDFC Life. The idea is very simple. Even the biggest fear which we have right now is about our health. I can see pharma companies over here, which is Sun Pharma, Cipla, Lupin, Dr. Reddy's, Ipca Laboratories, and other companies. What is equity investment in a very simple terms? Equity investment in simple terms means investing into businesses, and businesses over a longer period of time creates wealth. Today we talk about work from home. Okay, this is a concept which is catching up. Equity investment is working, no working at all, but you're still creating money. This is the only profession in the world, equity investment, where you get money for not doing anything. Let's imagine when I invest into Reliance Industry, Mukesh Ambani is doing all the hard work, shareholder in that company. When I invest into HDFC Bank or HDFC Limited, Deepak Parekh is doing all the hard work. I am just a shareholder in that company. When I hold D-Mart or I hold Nestle or Hindustan Lever or PNG or Maruti or Cipla or Dr. Reddy's, somebody else is doing the hard work. I'm just a part owner of the company. This in simple terms is called as equity investment. Equity investment is basically investing into businesses. And unfortunately, when we look at the money control or CNBC, we watch daily and we look at the prices, we forget actually what we are holding. We forget that we are holding businesses. We think equity means watching CNBC and markets on a daily basis. First thing which I wanted all of you to understand what equity means. And once you understand equity, things become simple. Now the thing is, why does equity prices go up? And it's very simple. As long as companies are making profit or earnings over a longer period of time, stock markets will also go up over a longer period of time. It's very simple, because at the end of the day, stock prices actually are a slave of earnings or profits. If profits are moving up, the stock price will eventually move up. And that's how the law of equity market moves up. But the unfortunate point is the journey of equity market is not a straight line. How should one understand or view equity market? Equity market is not a straight line from 1 to 10. It's just moving as a straight line. Think of equity market exactly like life. If I ask you, what is the journey of life? And I'm sure everybody will say the journey of life is not a straight line. You have good times, you have bad times, you have boring times, you have amazing times. You have times where you almost feel that everything perfect is happening in life. And there are periods in life where you almost feel there are such dull period and boring period where life is not progressing at all. And then there are periods in life which are so horrible that you almost feel as if you've gone back in life 2 to 3 years or 4 years. This is how journey of every life, every person would look like. The journey of equity is no different. Sensex, which is nothing but the top 30 stocks of the country, started in 1980. Okay, this is like approximately 41 years back. In fact, it's the same year when I was born in 1980. If somebody would have invested just mere 1 lakh rupee in 1980, the value today, as we speak, the Sensex is around 47,000. The value would have become approximately 4.7 CR. 1 lakh would have become 4.7 crores. And that's how the journey of equity market would have been. But the problem is, whatever returns equity market gave, unfortunately, they were not a straight line. There were years where equity market gave no returns. There were years where equity market gave amazing returns. To show you with data, let me go to the next slide. Let me show you a journey of last 20 years of Nifty. And this is very interesting because to understand equity market, you have to understand the journey. Now, the interesting part is the journey is very interesting. Okay, let's take the journey of last 20 years, 2000 to 2003. Okay, Nifty is nothing but the top 50 stocks of the country. 3 years, equity market gave no returns. Let's imagine if you were an investor and I told you, you know what, buy the top 50 companies of the country, just buy and hold them for 3 years or hold them for long term. First 2-3 years, you made no returns. I'm sure you'll get disappointed. You will say, what do you mean by holding companies? These companies are making no returns. I would have rather put this money into a fixed deposit and I would have made good returns, at least 7-8% return. I've lost money because of that. And obviously you will get disappointed and you might possibly remove your money. 2004, 5, 6, 7, these 5 years, equity market gave amazing returns. Equity markets were behaving like Ferrari. Every year they were giving amazing returns. During these times, you will always feel that, you know what, I am a very risk-taking investor. I'll put all my money in equity market. Why should I look at conservative products like fixed deposit or fixed income? All the money should be into equity. 2008, because of global financial crisis, equity market corrected by almost 50%. During these times, practically you will start cursing equity markets. You will say that equity market is a fraud. It's a gambling, it's speculation, and all the worst things which you can say, okay? Because you see your hard-earned money getting eroded by 50%. 2009, when there was still a lot of pessimism, equity market recovered and bounced back. Then look at the very interesting period, 2008 to 2014, for almost 6 years, equity market gave no returns. Imagine 6 years, you made no returns in equity market. It's like a businessman who is going to do a business and for 6 years he makes no returns. How boring and how frustrating it can become. But 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, very good 5 years for equity market. Suddenly in 2020, because of the fear of pandemic, market corrects by 36%. Then again, market bounces back. And as we speak, they're around 47,000 level. The entire journey, if you look at it, the entire journey is a journey of boring times, good time, horrible time, boring times, good time, bad times, and amazing times. In fact, if you pick up any autobiography of any businessman, you will see that his entire journey is also exactly like this. This chart for me, in a very simple terms, is a journey of a businessman. If you want to invest into equities, you're psychologically, you're mentally, you should behave like a businessman. You should not behave like a service class. Okay, fixed income is like service class. I work in fixed income. I work in a service class. My journey is like a fixed income. And what do I mean by that? Every year, my salary typically grows by 5, 6, 7, 8, 10%. Okay, that's called as fixed income. But somebody who is doing business, his journey is like equity market. You have good times, bad time, and boring times. So when you are investing into equity, you're psychologically, you should be like a businessman. You have to understand, my horizon is long term. If you ask any businessman, what is the horizon for your business? He will laugh at you. He will say, when I started this business, I didn't have time horizon. My objective is to grow the business. My objective is my children will manage the business. A businessman's holding period is perpetual. But people who invest into stocks and businesses like us, we have time horizons. And this is a very sad part when it comes to equity investment. All you have to do in equity investment is think about them like businesses and hold them for as long as possible and as simple as it can't get as simple as this. Once you have understood equity market, and if you look at the entire journey, you would have questioned, you know what, last 40 years have been very easy for India. we had a lot of good time, we had a lot of growth and this and all that stuff. I'm not sure whether things will look great in the future. And that's a unfortunate point. Today, we are in a pandemic and it seems very horrible to us. The problem is anything which is very recent, okay, and this is called as recency bias. Anything which is recent seems very big, but the moment this thing gets over, we tend to forget about it. So if I ask you, what did you had for breakfast today morning, or what did you had for lunch yesterday, most likely you'll remember it. But if I ask you, what did you had for lunch or breakfast day before yesterday, most likely you have forgotten about it. Why? A human being by nature can only remember things which are very recent. It is very normal.
ठीक चल रहा है, ऐसी चलेगी क्योंकि मेरे को वो लग नहीं जाती।
Can you help people to mute? Okay. So basically, the biggest problem of a human brain is it gives too much importance to recent events. Okay. And look at the classical example is elections. Bihar elections, everybody was focusing upon. Now we'll have West Bengal and elections in Tamil Nadu. Will people forget? We will focus and again they'll forget about it. The beauty is we give too much importance to what is happening right now. Let's look at history. It's not that we never had tough times. In fact, in the last 40 years, we saw two prime ministers which got assassinated, Indira Gandhi and Rajiv Gandhi. We had 1991 economic crisis which took place in the country, where India didn't had import dollars to manage imports for just few days. We had Mandal Commission. We had three prime ministers from third front, like I.K. Gujral, Devi Gowda, and VP Singh. We had stock market scams of Harshad Mehta, Ketan Parekh. We had many terrorist attacks, including Mumbai 26/11. We had demonetization. We had Kargil war, and now we are facing problems with China. We had dot-com bubble, where IT bubble took place in 2000. In 2008, we had a global financial crisis, housing bubble, which took place in 2008. In 2017, we had demonetization. Now we are facing pandemic. What I'm trying to say is that there is always something happening in the world. And I've just talked about few events. In fact, if you look at every year, there is always something happening in the world. Every few years, we have elections, we have budgets every year. There is some challenge every year which keeps on happening. The bottom line is everything, something or another will always happen in the world. But still, businesses will grow from a long-term perspective, and equity means investing into businesses from a long-term perspective. Now, this is first point, which I always want to tell people, that don't get too much carried away with recent events. Today, we are crazily worried about our health and pandemic. Trust me, few years down the line, majority of us, when things will become a little bit normal, majority of us would have even forgotten about the pandemic, because during those times, something else will be on our minds and our brains. We will have even forgotten about pandemic. And that's how the human nature is. It gives too much importance to what is happening right now. Anything which is in distant past, we tend to forget about it. So as a good and a logical investor, don't give too much importance to stock market in terms of what is happening right now. Look at the long-term picture. Look at the times when you have boring times, good times, bad times. I love to keep this picture in front of me always. It just reminds me of very simple things. Equity journey is not a straight line. You have boring times, bad times, good times, and ugly times. Stay invested, stay put, and you will make returns. The interesting point is, I know a lot of people who want to time the market. And I give you two instances. In fact, first instance is about 2020. And then I'll talk about an incident which happened around 8 to 9 years back. 8 to 9 years back, there was an election result which was about to come, where UPA government got formed. The UPA 2 government got formed. Nobody in the market had expected that India will have a government which is stable. When the results were started getting counted in the morning, majority in the morning itself, the people started realizing that UPA 2 most likely will become, will possibly become and start winning, because they were getting a lot of majority. Markets rebounded, and in just one day, this Nifty had two upper circuits. And what do we mean by upper circuits? Market moving up by 10% is called an upper circuit. You had 2 to 3 upper circuits in a single day. Because of upper circuits, market had to get closed. Upper circuit, market got closed for one hour. Again, you had a second upper circuit. On that particular day, Sensex and Nifty gave approximately 27% return in just matter of one day. Why timing the market is actually a sin when it comes to long-term investing? Because it is generally seen that if you miss those amazing days or amazing months or amazing years in equity market, you will actually not make good returns. That's why staying invested at all given points of time is the biggest mantra which I want to talk about equity market. Don't time the market, because you don't know how the market might behave in next few days, few months. Classical example is, second example is also 2020. For all the people who are timing the market in 2020, it's a cruel or a rude reminder that timing the market is so wrong, because market has a will of its own. It moved up from 26,000 Sensex, and as we speak right now, it's 46. Timing the market is the worst thing which are invested.